What's up, home team? Coach Jake here. This is going to be part one of a series talking about some specific movements that you're not typically going to see here at Down Home. So the first movement that we're going to talk about is a sit-up. Okay, so a sit-up is a very traditional exercise. People have been doing it in conditioning programs forever. It's very highly utilized in the military, and it's also used probably too much in kids' PE classes. So a couple of the reasons why we don't necessarily want to do a lot of sit-ups for the general population. Again, I want to stress, I'm not going to contraindicate a specific movement. I'm just going to find reasons why the vast majority of people probably shouldn't do a high volume of these specific movements. So with the sit-up, the idea is to get a stronger six-pack core, right? So the rectus abdominis, the muscles that basically flex the spine, okay? In their role in terms of spinal flexion, they're gonna flex that spine about 30 degrees. The rest of the work to sit the rest of the way up into that full seated position is going to be done by the hip flexors themselves. Okay, so primarily the psoas, the iliacus. Put those two together, we get the iliopsoas. So the psoas for most people is probably going to be already short and tight. Why? Because we sit most of the day, right? So if you've been at the office since 8 o'clock this morning and you come and train at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, ultimately you have been in a position of seated hip flexion. And if I ask you to come in and do 150 sit-ups or 600 sit-ups or whatever it is, we're just going to exacerbate that pattern in that position. So we're just reinforcing probably a suboptimal movement and a suboptimal position. Now, there may be a case where someone is more of an extension dominant type of person. Maybe they're standing all day. Maybe their hip flexors are nice and long, nice and loose, probably a little bit weak. That person, yeah, sure, maybe a sit-up would be appropriate. But for the vast majority of people, which is kind of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, we're going to view the sit-up as probably an exercise that's going to take them more steps backward than forward. And a lot of times, it can be a mechanism of injury, particularly spinal disc bulges. So research from Stuart McGill out of Waterloo University in Canada, probably the leading spine biomechanists in the world. He shows that repeated spinal flexion is the best mechanism to induce a disc rupture. And during a sit-up, it's something like 3,500 newtons of force, which is equivalent to over 750 pounds of force on the vertebrae. So the lower back, the lumbar vertebrae, they don't appreciate a lot of movement. Okay, they especially don't like a lot of flexion under load, which essentially is what a sit-up is, repeated flexion over and over again. So ultimately what that's going to do is it's going to delaminate the disc tissue and ultimately allow it to kind of weaken and loosen, and then eventually a disc bulge will happen. So we try to stay away from those. We try to stay away from especially under high rep, intense conditions, such as for time or for as many as possible. So we want to stay out of that fatigue state. Now, obviously, a sit-up is something that you should functionally be able to do. You probably do it to some degree every morning when you get out of bed. Other than that, there's not a ton of functionality in a sit-up itself. And another thing is there are just so many more superior ways to build core strength and stability versus just a traditional sit-up. And we go through a lot of those different various exercises on a day-to-day basis, because obviously a strong core is very, very important, but we just want to do it smart. We want to do it safe, and we feel as though kind of avoiding an onslaught of sit-ups on a daily basis is probably not the best way to go. Obviously, people that are very well conditioned, that have very, very strong cores, they can sustain a high load of sit-ups, and possibly even without any potential for injury. However, it's kind of one of those things, especially with disc bulges, you just don't know that it's occurring until it actually happens. So we want to be very, very cautious about that. So I hope you guys got something out of that. We'll be covering a couple more movements that you may be curious as to why we don't incorporate into the program. So be looking forward to those. Signing out.